I'm going to spend probably the first 10, 15 minutes of class going through last week, and then we'll get started on new material tonight. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get going. And of course, as we go through this, if you have a question, comment, let me know. And that's what we're here for. So do this every week. Okay, this is where we started last week. If you recall, we talked about the Septuagint or the LXX. We talked about the Masoretic text, and we talked about the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the handout that you have is basically the slides that I'm going to go through quickly tonight because you've got it on your handout, and we covered it all last week. But just to kind of, as a refresher, the Septuagint is extremely important as a translation. It's the first translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. Okay, hadn't been done before this time, and this took place approximately the 3rd century BC. So it's dated, which is great. The translators were Hebrew scribes that were brought to Alexandria, Egypt, to do the translation. And supposedly, according to tradition, there were 72 translators, and they did it in 72 days. So take that for what it's worth. After it was translated, the known world at that time in the Mediterranean, which was speaking Greek, could now read and study the Hebrew Bible in a language that they understood. That's the beauty of the Septuagint or the LXX. The last bullet on this page, it's the standard Bible of the church when the church gets started. The majority of the church in the first century is going to be Gentiles. Paul's method, as Eddie's been teaching us on Sunday morning, is to go into a city, go into the synagogue, and then normally there was not that much of a response, so we went to the Gentiles. So the Gentiles make up the majority of the early church. Okay. So it's an important translation, and again, I hate to kind of go quickly, but we got to go quickly. We then moved on to the Masoretic text, and again, the Masoretes were a group of Jewish scholars, Jewish scribes, who took the standardized text of the Hebrew Bible, and during the medieval period, and they actually added what's called, down at the bottom of the screen there, a vowel pointing system. And I mentioned this last week, that Hebrew in and of itself is only, it's only in consonants, no vowels. And so what the Masoretes did, the beauty of their work, besides preserving the text, is that they added this vowel pointing system that could actually help other people to pronounce the words as they read the Old Testament in Hebrew. And I was going to put up some samples, but time doesn't permit. This basically says a lot of the same stuff. The thing I want you to understand is that the second paragraph there, that the Masoretic system of accents and notations was likely established in the 9th or 10th century AD. Okay, so 900 to 1000 AD. Okay, today, the last paragraph there, today the Masoretic text is usually going to refer to what's known as the Leningrad Codex. Okay? And from that comes the BHS, and I mentioned this last week, not going to belabor it, that the BHS is the Hebrew text that's used in, as far as I can study, in every English Bible that we have. It is the basis of our Old Testament. When it went from Hebrew into English, it was the BHX, which is based on what's called the Leningrad Codex. Okay? If you remember the Greek text that we looked at, starts off with the Codex, and then it comes down to the Textus Receptus on the King James side, and to the Nettles Holland and the United Bible Society's Greek text that is used to translate the Greek into English. Okay? Same thing happens with the Hebrew. Using the Leningrad Codex, it becomes the BHS and goes from there. Okay, that's a real quick overview. Of the Septuagint, the LXX, and the Masoretic text. Okay, any questions? No, keep going. How fast can you go through the Dead Sea Scrolls? Well, let's see what we can do here. Okay, and again, this is all in your handout, so these are the same slides. I'm just going to go through. Remember, I mentioned there are some resources out there that you can pick up, good ones that are available. Did anybody have a chance to watch this video? I mentioned last week, if you want to take a screenshot of this slide, quick before Mutt does it. Okay. This is the video that was the fellow that let's see, your Dead Sea Scrolls pamphlet. Dr. Randall Price is the one that wrote this. He's the one that's in this this video. It's about 50 minutes long, and it'll just give you. When I watched it, it was kind of like just it was like, wow. The biggest thing I came out of this video with is that there are so many caves in the Qumran area that have not been explored yet. And I mentioned last week that the biggest problem that the archaeologists are having is that it's a race against time with those that are robbing these caves of the scrolls and the artifacts that are in them. They sell them on the black market. That's the biggest problem that they have with the Dead Sea Scrolls at this point in time. The history, 75 years ago, this year, 1946, is when they were discovered. And they date the Dead Sea Scrolls anywhere from 300 BC to 65 AD. So that's a pretty good range there. And they're finding the copies in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. They are considered to be I think the greatest literary and archaeological discovery of our time. They really are. When you have a chance to dig a little bit deeper into them, if you're so led that way, there's just so much that we can be thankful for, that God in His providence preserved these scrolls for 2,000 years before they were discovered. So remember, we looked at the maps last week. The big thing I want you to see is the one on the left-hand side of the screen. Jerusalem, if you go directly east from Jerusalem, you run into Qumran and the area of the Dead Sea, the northern area of the Dead Sea. And some of you, I know, have been there, but it's and the Essenes, who are the ones that occupied this area, they basically left Judaism altogether and traveled over and started this community that's become known as Qumran. How were they discovered? Remember our friend Muhammad the Wolf? And of course, he was a young fella at the time. I don't know that he had the mustache, but again, just real fast, remember the story. He's a shepherd. He's a Bedouin shepherd. He's looking for a sheep or a goat out in the wilderness, comes across these caves and thinks maybe the sheep may have wandered in. He takes a rock, and this is all documented. It's really kind of neat. Takes a rock, throws it into that cave, and here's the shattering of pottery. And that's how the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. This happens in 1946. And now that this cave that they're standing in is known as Cave 1. It's the first cave discovered or explored. This is the Qumran community, and we talked a little bit about this last week. By 68 AD, the Romans had pretty much, either scattered the community altogether, wiped out many. Remember, this is during the time of the war that's going on between Israel and Rome. Okay? Israel is trying to expel Rome, and that just didn't work out real well for them. This is kind of an artist's rendering of what it looked like. This is probably the most important slide in this whole discussion. Okay? You need to understand that the Dead Sea Scrolls contain there's portions of every book of our Old Testament except for the book of Esther. And we talked about this last week. I don't know why Esther's not there. Maybe they'll discover it. There's a lot of caves that haven't been explored yet. But this is important, that every portion of our Old Testament has been documented there in the Dead Sea Scrolls. 2,000 years these scrolls have been sitting there waiting on God's perfect timing to be discovered. And they were. Remember the example that I showed you last week of the Isaiah scroll that's now housed in Jerusalem, in the Shrine of the Scroll, or something like that it's called. We mentioned this last week. I'm not going to belabor this again. This scroll was one of the first scrolls discovered. As a matter of fact, you saw the picture there with the two Bedouins near Cave 1. That was the first cave that was explored, and that's where they found the Isaiah scroll. The Isaiah scroll is 24 feet long. Okay, so if you think you have a hard time carrying your study Bible around with you, imagine carrying a scroll that's 24 feet long. That's about the length of this room, Wayne. Yeah, and it's only 10.5 inches high. Okay, it's not very high, but and that behind the text there is a photo of what a portion of the scroll looks like. Okay, but that's all it was. It was 10.5 inches high and 24 feet long. The neatest thing about this is that it's the entire book of Isaiah, chapter 1 to chapter 66. It's all there in this one. Talked about how the scroll was actually sold to the Archbishop. I thought this was kind of interesting. For the grand sum of less than $100, you could buy this scroll. Okay, it finally makes its way after a few years to the United States and is advertised in the Wall Street Journal. I mean, this is like, who could make this stuff up? It's purchased anonymously for the state of Israel, and that's where it resides to this day. Okay? It's priceless. You can't put a price on something like this. The Isaiah scroll is over 2,000 years old. We need to keep that in mind. And this is the thing I tried to point out last week, is that we have the Masoretic text, which up until this time was our oldest text that we have of the Old Testament. this predates, this book of Isaiah predates the Masoretic text by over 1,000 years. That's just, it's mind-boggling. You sit down and think about that. Okay? That we have, now we have, and it's so neat because you can actually go online and you can view this if you want. You know how to read Hebrew, it helps, but it looks kind of cool online. Anyways, the other big thing is that when the scholars compared the Great Isaiah Scroll to the Ben Asher Codex, which is our oldest codex of the Old Testament, and specifically the book of Isaiah, you can see the numbers up there on the screen. They're identical at 95% of the time. And the 5% that's in question is basically spelling differences and slips of the pen even. So here's God preserving His word in these caves for 2,000 years, and the evidence is it's monumental. It really is. To think that, we have a hard time keeping things identical over 5 or 10 years, let alone a whole millennium. 1,000 years, and it's just kind of neat the way that worked out. That's the first example that I wanted to show you. You have your Bibles. If you want to open them up to Psalm 22. Psalm 22. We're going to go through this, and that kind of ends the review. We really ran through this, didn't we? But again, everything's in your handout. And everything up to this point we covered last week. Where's my water? It's over here. Okay. Most of us know about about Psalm 22. Some call it the crucifixion psalm. You'd have to read the whole thing, which we just don't have time for tonight. But there was an issue that came up, and here's the issue. In the Masoretic text, up there on the screen, you can see where it says some wording issues resolved. You can see how verse 16, Psalm 22, verse 16 reads in the Masoretic text. Notice that it says, like a lion are my hands and feet. Okay? That's how the Masoretic text reads. Okay? In the Dead Sea Scrolls, it actually translated that they pierced my hands and feet. There's a big difference there. And I know it's hard to see up on the screen. Actually, it's hard to see even when you magnify it, as this fella did. That's in that square down at the lower, about the center of the screen there. That's a portion of the Dead Sea Scrolls that was magnified, so they could find if this word, and it's only one letter in Hebrew, was lion or was it pierced. Okay, and I don't want to get into how they did all this or whatever, but that's one of the things that the Dead Sea Scrolls are helping scholars determine is the accuracy of our Old Testament based on the Masoretic text, comparing it up against the Dead Sea Scrolls. The problem is, unlike the book of Isaiah, we don't have the whole book of Psalms. We don't even have all of Psalm 22, but we have a portion, just happen to have a portion that is in comparison to our English Bible, verse 16. Okay? And verse 16, and this is the KJV that's up there on the screen, okay, reads, for dogs have encompassed me, the assembly of the wicked have enclosed me, they pierced my hands and my feet. Okay. Now, there's a lot more research that has to be done on this. So I just want to kind of let you know that those are the sort of things that the Dead Sea Scrolls are helping scholars to determine. To determine. And I think this is important. I looked in just about every translation that I could. Okay, the only translation that differs is the Net Bible. Remember we talked about the Net Bible a couple weeks ago, and I said, it's a good one to have because you can go online. You can go online and bring up the Net Bible if you want. But again, I also told you that you need to be careful, like with any translation. Okay, right now tonight I've got the New American Standard. Okay, there's things in here that are we have to compare with other translations. So in the Net Bible, it reads differently. It reads like it does in the Masoretic text, and that's what they used as their basis. But every other English translation of Psalm 22, verse 16 reads just like this. They pierced my hands and feet. They pierced my hands and feet. Okay? So something to get you thinking. One other thing, and we'll move on from here. If you look at the crucifixion accounts, and I've got them listed over on the right-hand side of the screen from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, they all quote from Psalm 22, not necessarily verse 16, but they quote from Psalm 22, which, in my simple way of thinking, is that if the writers of our Gospels were led by the Holy Spirit, and we believe they were led by the Holy Spirit, to include verses from the Old Testament, specifically from Psalm 22, then I think Psalm 22 is not only messianic in its description, but its prophecy was written, golly, one was Psalm 22 was written like it's a Psalm of David.
1,000.
So it's like 900 BC. That's when David wrote. That's approximate his time period there. Okay, and now we come forward. Now we're 3,000 years from the time of David, and yet Psalm 22, states everything that's happening at the crucifixion. Okay, you'll have to go back. You'll have to look at the crucifixion accounts. And if you have, most Bibles now kind of break out the Old Testament verses, so they're real easy to pick up on. And if you have a good reference Bible, it even tells you where they're quoting from in Psalm 22. You're in Psalm 22. Go ahead and turn over to Zechariah chapter 12. Okay? Zechariah chapter 12. If you go over to the book of Matthew, and then you come back from Matthew, you go to Malachi, and then just before Malachi is Zechariah. That's how I find it. That's the easiest way to find it. Okay, go to Matthew, go back to Malachi, and then right before Malachi is Zechariah. And I know we've got several different translations, so let's hear from them. But listen to, and this is quoted, by the way, in John's Gospel. In chapter 19, I had the reference and I never wrote it down. I think it's around 37 or something like that. But someone read verse 12, and I don't like pulling a verse, and just reading it. I like to see it in its context, but we just don't have time tonight. So Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10. Got it.
And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced. They will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son. Okay. They're going to look on the one that they've done what? They've pierced. There's no question here. The word pierced is the word pierced in the Hebrew. Okay.
No question. Actually, the word that's used here is the idea of that would be used in a spear. Now, think of this, okay? It's the idea of a spear being thrust into somebody. That's the idea of being pierced here, okay? And here we are. Zechariah is, what, 600 somewhere, 700. Um, I always forget if he's post-exilic or not. But anyways, it's a long time before our New Testament comes into play. And I think John 19 also quotes from Zechariah. He quotes this verse that they'll look on me, the one that they've pierced. Okay? So I just kind of bring this out to let you know that whatever the controversy is about Psalm 22 verse 16, okay, there are other passages that we can turn to that lay it out for us. The crucifixion from the Old Testament prophesied hundreds and hundreds of years before Christ walked the earth. Okay.
Is John 19:37.
Is it John 19:37? Thank you. Okay. Now my memory's not as bad as I thought it was. Okay. Okay. Let me wrap up our study on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and again, I hope it's kind of whet your appetite to want to dig in a little bit more about this. There's a quote that I thought made a lot of sense as a wrap up. Apart from the Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient witnesses to the Hebrew Old Testament that are actually written in Hebrew are almost non-existent. They're almost non-existent. Because of this, the Dead Sea Scrolls may easily be one of the greatest archaeological finds of all times. See, we have lots of Old Testament scrolls that are written in other languages, okay, specifically Greek, but to find portions of our Old Testament that date as old as the Dead Sea Scrolls and to be written in Hebrew, well, that's another animal altogether there. Okay, that's something that we don't normally see, and that's why I think this is important for us to keep in mind. And so, with that said, it's a wrap. I don't know. I always have food on my mind when I come into this class for some reason. Any questions, any comments about, now I know, it was basically just the last 10 minutes that was new material, but we've covered a lot in the last 2 weeks about our Old Testament. Anything before we move into our next section?
I'm just going to very briefly say something that just, I've never seen that thing about lion's paw or anything like that before. But what would crucifixion do to somebody being pierced with spikes through this?
That's a good point. That's a good point.
I mean, physically,
yeah,
would it not appear that way? I think back to the studies I did on Freemasonry by the sure grip of the lion's paw. He raised up. That's the grip.
Yeah.
Am I right, Brother Gary?
Yeah. What Wayne's talking, for those of you that are online and can't hear, what Wayne's talking about is during crucifixion, we know archaeologically that you could never crucify someone by going through the palm of the hand. It'd rip right out. Okay, I mean, it sounds disgusting, but that's what would happen. They would crucify right here. This is your carpal tunnel right here. You've heard of people that have carpal tunnel syndrome. Well, the reason that it's so painful is because that's where all of the nerves run to your fingers, is through this area right here. That's what made crucifixion so excruciating. As a matter of fact, we get that word excruciating from the word crucifixion. That's where that word comes from. Okay, and what Wayne was saying is that when the nails were driven through here, it would cause the hand and the feet the same way to just to pull in. Okay, And that would be, symbolically, like the idea of a lion's paw. Okay, it could be. So that's a good point. That's a good point that you may bring up. Whether that's the case or not,
It doesn't take away from any of it. To me,
No.
it does. Either way, it doesn't take anything away from it. It's
right? Yeah,
It's still the same story.
Yeah.
Jesus was crucified.
yeah, that's it. And for all of us, for all of mankind, he died on the cross in a way that we don't even like to talk about, but we have to at times. Any other comments or questions? I'm in better shape than I thought,
You're good. One of the things that kind of blows my mind is you have probably a Muslim find these scrolls, look at them and say, hey, I can make money off this.
That's a good point, Mutt. That's a good point. Yeah, you have a Muslim that's discovered these scrolls, and brings them, actually sells them for whatever he can get. You have to, you weren't here last week when we talked about the discovery, is that the Bedouins that found these, there were 7 scrolls that came out of Cave 1 to start with, and they sold them to an antiques dealer in Bethlehem for pocket change. Even less than $97.20 that the antiques dealer got when he sold them to the Archbishop in Jerusalem of the Greek Orthodox Church. Anyways, believe it or not, we're going to start a whole new subject tonight, and it's new and it's not new, because we basically have been talking about the King James Version since whenever I started teaching several months back. Okay, so a lot of what we're going to look at the remainder of tonight and probably next week it's going to be a lot of information that we've already covered. As a matter of fact, I even put slides into this presentation that we have already looked at, but they go right along with what we're trying to learn about this King James only controversy. And I mentioned to you folks, I think during the introduction, I'll mention it again tonight quickly, just in passing, but Jane and I moved here from Phoenix, and out in Phoenix, we didn't, best of my knowledge, there really wasn't an issue out there, or there may have been, I just wasn't aware of it, of King James onlyism, if that's the word we want to use. And then we moved here to the South, and you could probably go, a mile this way down Main, or a mile, not even a mile, I guess, down Main, and you're going to run into churches that teach and preach that the King James Version is the only version that we should be using. And so this is kind of like, this kind of got my juices flowing when I started putting this all together. It's like, we got to do a segment on this, if for nothing else, so that we understand the arguments from both sides. And that's why we gave everyone this book. I have to hold it up so the people that are at home can see what they're missing by not being here live and in person, right? And honestly, I mean, for those of you that are watching now or sometime in the future, this is probably the best book you can buy on this topic. It's written by Dr. James White, and I think it's, we wouldn't have given this out if I didn't think it was a excellent resource. And I know several of you have already looked through some of it or read portions of it. And are you impressed with his writing?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, he's a great writer. He's a scholar, and I mentioned a few weeks back, this book especially is, to me, is you need to have if you're going to study this subject seriously. I don't agree. I mentioned this before. I'll mention it again. Because when you do things like this, people think, oh, anything James White, Paul said, get his book, I'll get this book. But I don't agree with James White on a lot of things. First of all, he's a 5-point Calvinist, and I don't even want to go there tonight, okay? He's reformed in his theology, okay? So Take that if you know what that means. Take it for what it's worth. But he's written some very good books. He's written a great book on the Trinity. If you want a good book on the Trinity, he's written a very good book on the Trinity.
Was he a Baptist?
Yeah, actually, the church in you'll love this. Okay, the church that he is one of the elders in. He's not the pastor. He's an elder. Is called I think it's called Phoenix Reformed Baptist Church. Okay, it's Reformed Baptist. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a Reformed Baptist, but there's Reformed Baptists out there. And James White is one of the elders in this church. So, take that for what it's worth. Like I said, all that aside, this book is the one you need to have, and that's why you have it. Okay? I just, I hope that you'll spend time reading it. Another book that's out there, if you're really interested, is very similar to White's book. It's called Can You Trust Just One Bible? And it's written by Charles Lantz, okay, Lantz. So that's just another resource if you're interested in it. Okay. And because we're using White's book so much, it's actually going to help me to reduce this down to probably just 2 weeks. Because everything that I want to say, he beat me to it, so I don't even have to say it. Let's talk about those of you out there that are KJV positive, okay? Are you? Well, in White's book, he lists 5 different groups. I'm saving us some time tonight, and I'm bringing it to 3. I'm only breaking this down into 3 different degrees of King James onlyism. Okay, and I don't know if I read that somewhere, if I made that word up, but I like it, so I'm sticking with it. Okay, so there are basically 3 different types of people out there that use the King James Bible. Okay, there are those that prefer the King James. And let's be honest, I think everyone in this room has probably read from the King James at one time or another or used it. Okay, they read it because of its majesty and its reverence. They're familiar with it, and maybe that's the only Bible they've ever used their whole life. Okay, they're not hung up on, if you're sitting next to them in church and you're reading from an NIV or an ESV or whatever. They're not going to look at you like, you've got, grown an extra head or something. But they just prefer it. And there are those people out there that just prefer the King James. Okay, I have.
I'd say I fall in that class.
You would fall into that class. Okay. And there are people, there are scholars that I follow, and in their writings and in their teaching. And most of them do not use the King James, but they'll use the New King James, which, by the way, is a perverted, don't talk to a King James person about, because the New King James is no good. They've got to put the hex on that one, okay? But I digress, okay? So there are those that prefer it. There are also those that believe that the text, okay, that underlies the King James Version. That's the Greek. That's the Textus Receptus, or what's known as the received text. Okay, that is a more accurate text than the modern translations use. And so they kind of dig their heels in, okay, at this point and say, well, I use the King James because the Greek behind the King James New Testament is more superior than the now here we go again. Now everyone should know this, okay? The Byzantine text is more reliable than the Alexandrian text. Okay, now I can. A month ago I could say that and they'd be looking at me like, what's he talking about? But now you folks know all these neat words, right? And that's what they believe. And so because they believe that, they use the King James, and they refer people that want to read the Bible to the King James. Okay, so I could probably get along with both those groups, but then we move into the third group. Okay, I wish they had some music playing, like dun, 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 like Jaws or something. Okay, we move into this third group, and here's the third group that can really cause some issues. Okay, they believe that the King James is the only authoritative text, and that it has been, now this is the English text, has been divinely inspired and is as accurate. This, I read this and it almost makes me want to chuckle, but these people are dead serious about this. Okay, they say that the English of the King James is more superior, it's divinely inspired, even more so than the original Greek and Hebrew manuscripts themselves. Now, think about that statement. Think about that statement, okay? What they're saying is, okay, and I got a NASB, pretend it's a New King, or it's a King James. Can't say New King James, okay? But they're saying that the King James Bible itself, the English of the King James Bible, is superior than the original Greek and Hebrew manuscripts. I mean, it's like I get speechless. It's like, do people really believe this stuff? They not only believe this stuff, they teach this stuff, and they write volumes. You can't believe how much ink has been spilled on this last one here, number 3, because it's the number 3 guys that are the ones that are kind of, they're the ones that are like at you.
Rabid fanatics.
Rabid, yeah, exactly. They are fanatics. They are.
Is it more prevalent in denominationally? Is it more the Baptist church that believes that way?
Yeah, you're independent
Yeah.
fundamental Baptist.
Yeah, that's where I
Yeah,
grew up.
most of
That's why
the churches that believe this, are now. Just a side note. I always try and read doctrinal statements of churches. I mean, I don't spend my spare time doing that, but when we moved out here, I was looking when we were looking for a church. I tried finding doctrinal statements. The ones that I could find, most of them said, we believe the King James version of the Bible, the English Bible, is the only version that's to be used in the church. Okay, and so right away, they kind of X'd that off. What's happening nowadays is, and again, I don't know how many of you have looked at doctrinal statements of churches lately, but most churches are not posting on their websites. They're not even putting their doctrinal statements on there. Okay, is that good? Is that bad? I'll let you decide. This church that we're in, Trenton First Baptist, we don't have our doctrinal statement posted. We don't even have a summary of our beliefs, because I went this afternoon and looked through every click on it, and we don't. I mean, that was just decided, and that's the way it's laid out. Okay, it's a personal thing, I know, but I like to know what a church believes before I enter it. Okay, I mean, for all I know, when they don't post a doctrinal statement, they're chasing snakes around the auditorium. I don't know, honestly. So I make light of that, but I mean that's true.
Leaves it open for us to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's anyways.
Leave some flexibility.
So I just leave that up to you. Like I said, the ones that I found that post their doctrinal statements, most of them say we believe that it's the King James only thing. It's that's it.
A lot of those, Paul, a lot of number 3s
Yeah.
go past the third word in number 2, though.
Yeah, that's that.
They don't, they believe, but they don't have a clue where their Bible came from.
That's right. That's right. That's a good point. Yeah, and actually, White's got a real good statement after this slide that I think will kind of summarize what Mutt's talking about as far as people understanding what they believe. Okay, this third group that we're talking about, they reject every other translation. Okay, and like I said, even the New King James, which is the Bible I use for study at home. I use the New King James Version as my study Bible, even though I kind of lean towards the Alexandrian text. I use the New King James. If you bring a New King James into a King James only church, you might as well bring in, good news for modern man. Okay, that's basically what they're looking at. Okay, it's got to say KJV on the side, or you're out. Okay, they believe that God was only inspiring those who compiled the KJV and no others. Okay, I don't know, if God kind of gave them a little note or something and said that's the only one. They believe and teach that the King James version of the Bible should be the only one, the only English version to be read, studied, and preached from. Okay, this is what they believe. The number three guys. Okay, the number three guys. Okay? Furthermore, they believe that there is a conspiracy. Oh boy, here we go. They believe there's a conspiracy to change the Bible in every modern translation of the Bible. Not just some, not just a few, all of them. All of them. Okay? So if you're not using a King James, I don't care what translation you bring, you're reading something that's been conspired. And what are they conspiring for? These conspirators. Okay, they claim that all modern translations are based on corrupt Greek manuscripts of the Bible, and that all of them distort the message of the gospel and the deity of Jesus Christ. Okay, that's what they believe. They believe there's a, could I say Luciferian? How's that sound? Oh, that's a cool word, huh? There's a Luciferian conspiracy out there to take the Bible, to take God's word, and to pervert it, and would get it into the hands of all the Christians, and then they won't believe the deity of Christ. They won't believe that the gospel is the gospel. Okay? Well, how do they do that? Well, you have to go back to the Greek text. Okay? Well, what if we don't read the Greek text? Well, just trust us. We can read it, and we know it's like the JWs when they come to your door, or not if they come to your door, but when they come to your door. Okay, they're going to tell you all this Greek stuff. It's like the first thing I like to ask them is like, well, where'd you get your degree in Greek? And basically they're just mouthing what they've been. And this is, that's what happens in KJV only churches. Okay. Because the pastors, most of the pastors, all they know is what they've read. And they're reading the KJV only people. And so that's where they're getting all their information. Here's what White says, and I think this is a good summary here. Okay. In reality, there is no conspiracy involved on either side. There are simple, logical reasons why there are differences in the translations. Unfortunately, and this is what Mutt was getting at, okay, few people take the time to learn the backgrounds of their Bible. Hence, they are easily misled and upset by variations that are perfectly understandable and do not indicate any kind of evil intention or corruption. Okay, let that sink in. Let that sink in. Okay, that's basically what White's saying, is that most people either don't want to take the time to understand. Well, I keep going back to Dr. Douglas Moo and his quote at the very beginning of our class about the two things that people don't want to know. They don't want to know how sausages are made, and they don't want to know how Bibles are translated. Okay, and that's true. Okay, they don't want to know how their Bible's translated. I trust my pastor. My pastor said that this NASB that you're reading is of the devil, and that's good enough for me. Well, we're called to be students of God's word. Not students of our pastor. Our pastor teaches us, and every Sunday from the pulpit, our pastor says you need to look into it for yourself. Study it on your own. Look at what I'm saying. Is it true or not? Okay. So that's what White's getting at here, is that there's answers to these questions, and we've actually answered some of these questions already. Okay, we're gonna try and answer some more, but we're not going to get so deep that we're getting lost in this. Okay, in the KJV only advocates, it's an us versus them mentality, and that's as simple as I can make it. It's an us versus them. You're either with us on God's side, or you're over here on Satan's side. Okay. If you're over here on our side, well, then you read the King James Version only. If you're over on Satan's side, then you're reading that evil ESV or NIV or whatever it might be. Okay, the NASB. Okay, you're reading that, and that's I don't even want to get into quoting them because it's so vitriolic, is that the term? It is so spiteful, so hateful, that if you've read anything by these authors, it's just from cover to cover. It's nothing but hate. It's hate against you. You can't believe what they've done with James White. He's debated them. Okay, you don't want to debate James White when it comes to the Greek text and stuff like that. Okay, I mean, the man's a scholar. Okay. And they supposedly put their best up there, and he just shreds them. Okay, so what do? They can't win in a debate, so they come out with their own books, and they just shred them, and say he's an instrument of Satan. That's what he's called by King James only people. Okay, it's sad, it really is, within the body of Christ that this is going on. I don't even know where you start with this. I really don't. What do I got? Just a few minutes left here. Hey, does this look familiar? You folks could probably draw this in your sleep now, right? But once again, as I say, every time I put this slide up, draw a line down the middle, and on the left side is the Byzantine Textus Receptus, King James only. And I almost did this afternoon, but I decided not to fool around. But the KJV only does come from the Textus Receptus, but in the King James only battle that we're going, it actually needs to go, kind of almost in the middle, because they don't believe they believe it's one of those satanic Bibles. Okay, but it does come from the Textus Receptus. It is translated from the Textus Receptus. Okay, and then on the other side of the screen are the Greek texts that come from the Alexandrian family and come down to us in the new, what are called the modern translations, starting with the NASB and going all the ways up to, we talked a few weeks ago, there's new translations coming out even this year. Okay. Let me go through one more slide, and then I think we'll call it a night. This is another quote by James White. It's a long one, that's why I have to get a drink, see. And actually, I think you may have seen some of this in previous slides during our study up to this point. When we speak of textual differences between the TR, that's the Textus Receptus, or the King James Version, okay, and modern text, we need to immediately emphasize something that is often lost in this debate. There is no doctrine of the Christian faith that is based upon any single text, and no doctrine of the faith is changed or altered by any variation of the text. If one applies the same rules of exegesis, and basically that's the, taking, studying God's word and pulling out from it its teachings and sharing them with others. If one applies the same rules of exegesis to the TR and to the NA and the UBS, that's the other side of the slide there, the results will be the same. The variations do not change the message. And that's key. That's key for us to understand. So whether you're reading out of the King James Version or whether you're reading out of the New American Standard Version, you're still going to get the same doctrine out of it because it's all there. It's all God's word, and it's all true. I think this is probably a good place for me to stop. I don't want to go next. We'll get into a little bit more history next week, and then we'll look at some samples. And then I have about 5 or 6 summary slides that I might put into a handout for you. I don't know. Depends on how I feel next week. Okay.